NBA Insider has labeled a potential Jaylen Brown trade partner as, quote, the team to watch. We're going to discuss those trade rumors. Plus, are the Celtics just going to blow it up and tank entirely as Jayson Tatum recovers from his Achilles injury? We'll talk about it all on today's show. But first, I got to ask you, should the Celtics trade Jaylen Brown? Let me know. Type yes or no in the comment section. And if they trade JB, that might just mean the C's are going to blow it up. What's going on, Green Teamers? You're watching Celtics Today by Chat Sports. I am your host, Tyler Smith. It would be greatly appreciated if you go down below and hit that thumbs up icon on today's show as we're talking about a Jaylen Brown trade as Chris Mannix of Sports Illustrated has labeled the Spurs as the team to watch the closest on a Jaylen Brown trade. He went on a Celtics offseason podcast, and they were discussing whether or not the C's could trade Jaylen Brown, but really we're more so talking about potentially Giannis Antetokounmpo destinations, and the Spurs were brought up. But then Mannix said this: the team I'd watch the closest with a Jaylen Brown trade is probably the Spurs. Sure, I think the Spurs would love to make a run at Giannis, but do the Bucks ask for Stephon Castle? Like, is that on their wish list? And if it is, I can't see San Antonio doing a deal like that. Well, there's a little bit to unpack with that quote exactly. One, I just mentioned, they started by talking about Giannis Antetokounmpo trade destination. So this was not brought up as the Celtics are going to trade Jaylen Brown. The Celtics are looking to move off Jaylen Brown. That's not the case, and that's not what Mannix was insinuating. They were talking about Giannis spots, and then they kind of just were talking about the Spurs, and they're like, oh, yeah, well, on a Jaylen Brown trade, if the Spurs wanted to go that route, that's the team I would watch as far as getting conversations going with Boston. And then the second thing we have to unpack is, like, if the Celtics are going to make a trade with the Spurs for Jaylen Brown, like Stephon Castle or the second overall pick in this year's upcoming draft would have to be at the start of these conversations. That would be the focal point going back in Boston's return. And Mannix then iterated that the Celtics would get the second overall pick back in a potential Jaylen Brown trade. Now, I have some kind of reservations, like, do the Spurs really value Stephon Castle more than the number 2 overall pick? We'll discuss that in just a moment, but I want to bring it back to this. Why would the Spurs pivot to Jaylen Brown? Like, obviously, Giannis Antetokounmpo is a tier, 2 tiers, maybe even 3 tiers, depending on who you ask, above Jaylen Brown in the NBA, and he is a clear 1A option on a title team that, for a Spurs roster that has just added De'Aaron Fox and has Victor Wembanyama hopefully healthy and playing at a top 10 level already in year 2 in this league, like, Giannis is a guy who they could compete right away from. But Mannix brought up this as the reason why they would pivot to Jaylen Brown. One of the concerns people in San Antonio told me about is you go and do a deal for a guy like Giannis, all of a sudden you've created a championship window, but it is a window with a closing date. You got De'Aaron Fox, who's in his late 20s, Giannis in his early 30s, and the last thing they want is to have a roster after those guys kind of age out where Wembanyama is maybe looking around going, all right, well, where are the young guys I'm going to play with after that? It certainly is a problem for another day, but that's on the mind of the San Antonio Spurs. That's why they want to hold on to Stephon Castle, so he could be that second guy opposite Wemby for a long time, assuming they trade that number 2 pick. And I just think that's a weird thing to assume, right? Like, why would that be the assumption that the Spurs want to go out there and trade the number 2 pick? Yeah, they have De'Aaron Fox, but I think any of the people who say that there's a logjam at the guard position with Dylan Harper being the presumptive number 2 overall pick, like, that just makes no sense to me. You pick best player available. Dylan Harper would go number 1 in 8 out of the last 10 drafts. So would they rather keep Stephon Castle or the number 2 overall pick in a potential Jaylen Brown trade? Well, Stephon Castle was awesome. He was the rookie of the year, and he showed a lot of great flashes. And he's only like 20 years old at this point. He still can't even legally drink in the United States, and he's still putting up really solid production last season. 15 points a night, yet he isn't even like a super polished scorer. Doesn't have the established outside jumper just yet. Still has, things to work on as far as jump shot creation overall and getting to his spots. Like, he is an elite defender. He's a good creator and a really good facilitator as well with the basketball. But with the upside in this draft, especially at the top, like, would they really bank on a guy who went 4th in a much weaker draft last year? I would have, probably taken him number 1, but still, would they rather have Castle or, the number 2 pick who could potentially be a 1 or a 2 on a title contending team? So in my estimation, like, if I'm doing this deal, like, the Celtics should be all over the number 2 pick. Give me the number 2 pick all day long. And, we can start moving on to, what salary fillers are working coming back to Boston, because we know Jaylen Brown makes $53 million. Now, I want to preface this trade idea that we're about to go with the fact that, like, Jaylen Brown making $53 million, like, right now, eventually going to be 60 plus, like, that's a huge contract to be taking on. So if you're trading for a Jaylen Brown, you're committing to that guy being either your best player or at least your highest salary player for the time being. He's on a supermax contract, and the reason the Celtics would think about moving off of him is because they have 2 supermax deals on their books. So the trade idea that is being floated out there, there's a couple different combinations that you could throw, but this is kind of the framework that Chris Mannix was kind of alluding to. It would look like a Devin Vassell, Harrison Barnes, and the number 2 overall pick in this year's upcoming draft in exchange for Jaylen Brown. Now, coming up on the back half of today's show, we're going to dive a little bit deeper into this trade, and there are also some pretty spicy rumors that are being floated around the NBA Twitter spaces that the Celtics might end up blowing this whole thing up. So Trader Brad might get in his bag, and we could see a whole different looking Celtics roster. We'll get to that in just a moment, but first, I got to give a huge shout out to our sponsor, and that is Prize Picks. Prize Picks is America's #1 daily fantasy sports platform because it's daily fantasy made easy. Here's how it works. All you guys got to do is pick a lineup of 2 to 6 players and just pick more or less, whether it's basketball, hockey. You got the finals going on in both of those right now, but there's also baseball and even crazy stuff like bowling, darts, golf, esports. They got the whole 9, and you can mix and match different sports in the same lineup and win up to 2,000 times your money. PrizePicks always wants to make it easier for you guys to win real money watching your favorite sports, so they give you awesome deals like a Taco Tuesday, where every Tuesday the discounted player stat projections up to 25% off, or on Flex Friday, where if you place a flex play lineup and you lose it, they'll give it back to you in promo funds up to $20. Also, our special deal here we're offering at Chat Sports, code CLNS, like you see in the bottom right of your screen. That gives you $50 for free when you sign up and place your first $5 entry. And with the finals starting up tonight, I have this entry for Game 1. SGA, more than 33.5 points. Isaiah Hartenstein, more than 7 rebounds. And Tyrese, Burton, more than 9 assists. You can tell my picks or fade them. Just go make sure you go and do it at Prize Picks. Download the Prize Picks app today. Use the promo code CLNS for $50 instantly when you place your first $5 entry. You don't even need to win to receive the $50. It's guaranteed. Prize Picks. Run your game. All that information will be clickable down in the comment section and description of today's video. All right, so let's unpack this blockbuster Celtics trade idea that sends Jaylen Brown to San Antonio. Look, from the Spurs' point of view, before we get to Boston, like, this is a good deal and makes a lot of sense for San Antonio. With De'Aaron Fox not on a supermax deal, and you have Victor Wembanyama still on the rookie contract, that creates a big 3 for the next half decade that you feel a lot of confidence in a uber competitive Western Conference as well. And the Spurs keep Stephon Castle in this deal. So what Maddox is worried about as far as having young talent down the line, you have Jaylen Brown, who's only 28 years old, and then you have a guy like Stephon Castle to hopefully polish his game up and become an all-star level player down the line. They give up Devin Vassell and Harrison Barnes, and Harrison Barnes on a $19 million expiring contract. So the Celtics can either reroute him immediately or something closer to the trade deadline. They can get that money off of their books and eventually get under the second apron by making this deal and rerouting Harrison Barnes. It already creates about a little over $7 million by making this trade straight up. And then you get a guy like Devin Vassell, who is a borderline 20-point per game scorer, man. Like, he averaged 16 a game last year on solid efficiencies. Like, the Spurs were bad, and they were in a lot of flux with the Wemby injury, especially second half of the season. Things kind of fell off of the rails. But Devin Vassell, over the past couple of years, man, he has been awesome. Like, he's on a good deal as well, making about $27 million over the next 4 seasons. Very, very affordable. And he's a solid defender. Like, he can score in bunches. Like, he shoot the 3-ball efficiently. 2 years ago, shot it at nearly 39%. And you know what? He's been available each of the last 2 seasons. Had an injury back in 2023, but overall hasn't had many concerns in that area. I think he could be a core piece either off of the bench or, you never know, potentially starting. He's only 24 years old, and with Derek White getting past 30, you never know how his game is going to age in 3-4 years. This is a core piece that will be a member of the Boston Celtics for years to come. So Devin Vassell is, an underrated part of this trade coming back. But the real trade chip, the thing that's getting this deal over the line, is the fact that you're getting the number 2 overall pick. And that number 2 overall pick presumptively is Dylan Harper. And like I alluded to, Harper would likely be the number 1 overall pick in 8 of the last 10 NBA drafts. Like, he probably would have went above Ja Morant, not above Zion, but like with this year's, Cooper Flagg instance, like that's a once in a generation prospect. It seems like Dylan Harper would have went number 1 any other year because he was an absolute dog, and the size profile that he has as well, being a 6'6" guard who draws a lot of comparisons to a James Harden. Like, he is an absolute bucket getter, and you know what? He didn't play much defense last year, but that's going to grow in time, and he's solid. Filled out right now as far as his frame goes, but he's going to get bigger. He's going to be able to defend. Like, he's got this Cade Cunningham style of frame. Is he as good of a defender maybe as Cade is at this point? Probably not, but he can get there over his NBA career. He's super young, a one-and-done prospect. Highlights were crazy, and he's got the clutch gene in him as well. Hit some big shots in his lone season at Rutgers. They were not a good team overall, but it was not because of Dylan Harper's play whatsoever. And then you make this deal, and you have a potential core now that you could argue has the best group of guards maybe in NBA history, man. Like, as far as, like, role players go, and then whatever Dylan Harper turns into, like, oh my goodness. Like, I understand this potential core doesn't necessarily have much size or depth in the front court, but this is kind of what you're working with as far as guys who are going to put the ball in the bucket. Jayson Tatum leading the way after he comes back from injury. Dylan Harper, you presume and hope that he's going to be a player at least in the tier of Jaylen Brown at some point during his NBA career. Derek White is still, as far as being a glue guy and a plug-and-play player, the best in the NBA. Peyton Pritchard is getting better and on an uber cheap deal. Devin Vassell, again, on an affordable contract, and he's going to play winning basketball as well. So I like this core. And then as far as filling out the front court goes, uncertainty around Cornette and Al Horford. But, you have the 28th pick in this year's draft. You have future capital down the line. And then whatever you get in KP and Drew trades, because if you make a trade for Jaylen Brown, the Celtics are probably going to blow it up elsewhere. Like, we already know that these two deals are likely this summer, but if they end up making this big swing and dealing JB, then you know that the whole thing's getting blown up, and KP and Drew are on their way out as well. So would you make this deal? Let me know in the comments section. Devin Vassell, Harrison Barnes, who probably gets rerouted, expiring $20 million, and the second overall pick in the 2025 NBA draft for Jaylen Brown. If it's too much, if it's too little, let me know. A for accept, D for decline. Let me know in the comments section. Honestly, I would have to say the Spurs probably say no in this deal. I think Chris Mannix is kind of off the mark here when it comes to what he thinks the Spurs value more. I would say they value the number 2 pick way more than Stephon Castle. But, you've already seen Stephon Castle play in the NBA. You haven't seen the unproven commodity at that number 2 overall slot. So maybe they could value Castle more. But I would say the Spurs say no to this deal. And, based on what Mannix is saying, I would say the Spurs say no to a deal that flips Castle in there in the number 2 overall pick slot instead. But this is one of the only Jaylen Brown packages that I would entertain. Guys, I'm not looking to move off of Jaylen Brown no matter what this summer. Look, if it helps out the Celtics, I'm in, and this deal would likely do that in my opinion. But if you trade Jaylen Brown, that means you are committing to blowing up this roster and forming a new core around Jayson Tatum for 2026, 27, and beyond. So, with that being said, where do the Celtics go thereafter? I don't know, but there are rumors rumbling around that this could be a real possibility. Now, Mannix said this later on the podcast about what teams view Boston as this summer. He said, teams I've talked to just aren't fully sure about what Boston wants to do. Do they want to just nibble around the fringes and get under the second apron? Or do they really want to reboot this thing, take that full gap year, and go into 2026-27 with Jayson Tatum and some other stuff as the centerpiece of this team? Look, there is certain uncertainty about this Boston Celtics future. We already know that they have to get off some money this summer. Getting under the second apron, it seems to be and is trending towards being mandatory for the Boston Celtics. But does that mean they're going to stop there and just, try to compete next season and do their best they can in the Eastern Conference? That might not be the case. Some NBA Twitter rumors are swirling, and they are a doozy. Per sources, a guy that I followed for a long time, has a good following on Instagram and on Twitter, and he has favored the Celtics in a lot of his content. But he says this: Fam, I have received some sad news related to the Boston Celtics. Even though I struggle to believe the second part, this source hasn't let me down. One, as many of us expected, Al Horford will be departing from the Boston Celtics next season. Number two, Brad Stevens is considering all options, including trading Jaylen Brown and tanking. The Celtics want to be in a position to contend in 2 seasons. I figured they'd try to get under the second apron, but it seems like they want to get under the luxury tax altogether. Nothing is set in stone yet, but I've been told to saddle up. Drastic changes are coming. This is sad news. Hope it doesn't happen. He also said that along with Al Horford departing from the C's, that Al wants to join a contender and not retire. I don't know what I don't believe in more with this rumor. I don't know if I believe less in Brad Stevens potentially wanting to tank or Al Horford wanting to leave the Celtics and play elsewhere. I think if he's done with the C's, that means he's just going to call it a career. So from my view, look, this is a very far-fetched early on rumor, but look, man, he said the source hasn't let him down to this point, so we're going to at least talk about it on today's show. And with the Chris Maddox stuff linking Jaylen Brown, or the Spurs at least, to Jaylen Brown, this is all real possibilities. Poor sources said this as well a couple of days ago. I'm hearing the Celtics want assets to compete in 3 seasons with a healthy Tatum, thus focus on shedding salary with this potential Jaylen Brown trade. And again, like that is kind of the 2 phrases that coincide. Jaylen Brown trade equals blowing it up and tearing it all down, rebooting this whole Celtics core. So, as far as where this all goes on the realistic scale, this is how I view the Celtics offseason and the potential of blowing up the roster. Brad Stevens is not set on any path at this point, from my view. I think that he could go both ways. From what I've gathered as far as his work as a general manager to this point, president of basketball operations, he makes the right deal for the Boston Celtics. Like, he makes the deal that is best going to suit this team and going to put them in a position to do what all 30 NBA teams want to do, win a championship. So, with that being said, if the right Jaylen Brown deal comes along, like that deal to the Spurs, then I think he's going to take it. He was not afraid to trade Jaylen Brown and Derek White for Kevin Durant a few seasons ago. So, like, what would stop him from trading Jaylen Brown now if he thought he was getting a blue-chip prospect back in return and setting up the roster and the franchise to contend down the line as they're in the midst of an ownership change? So, after that would happen, a roster blow-up would ensue. And I think that these 2 things could happen regardless of the Jaylen Brown trade, but it would definitely be accelerated and happen this offseason if it were to go down. Kristaps Porzingis and Drew Holiday would be on their way out, and the Celtics would look at an entirely new roster for next season. And then you are what you are for 2025-2026. Like, Jayson Tatum has a torn Achilles. Your championship ceiling is capped. Look, the Eastern Conference is not the most competitive as far as when you look at the Western, but it's still going to be very, very difficult to beat the Pacers, to beat the Knicks, to beat, who knows where Giannis is going to go. Giannis could be a Knick or somewhere else in the Eastern Conference next season. So you are what you are, and then you come back in 26-27 with a new core around Jayson Tatum. Maybe you have a guy like Dylan Harper who looks to be a superstar in this league, and then you have a lot of good cost-controlled contracts surrounding JT, and you're as good as anybody in the Eastern Conference for the future there after that. Look, whatever happens, I believe in Brad Stevens. Like, he has made deal after deal, signed contract after contract, to the point where I can't not believe in the vision that he has for this roster. He's, been exceeded expectations as a coach, exceeded expectations as an executive, and is one of the smartest basketball minds that I have come to know in my 15 years of watching the game. Like, Brad Stevens, if he's in charge, I will buy into whatever philosophy that he is pushing. He's a much smarter guy than I ever will be when it comes to this game. So if he thinks that blowing it up is the move and can make this team the best version of itself down the line when JT comes back, then I believe in Brad Stevens' vision. What do you guys think? Do you guys believe? What's your confidence level in Brad Stevens? Scale it for me down below. 1 to 100. 1 meaning that he's cooked, that this roster, the holiday extension, everything was a disaster after winning the championship. 100 means full faith ahead in what he's going to do this offseason and beyond. Let me know down in the comment section. And make sure you are subscribed to the channel, because if anything comes up or these rumors get a little hotter, we're going to cover them right here at Celtics Today. So lock us in as the number 1 spot for Celtics offseason content. Hit that big red sub button. We'll see you guys all in the next one. And as always, let's go C's.